Welcome to today's webinar with Stephen McCarthy on property investment for beginners. This webinar is live and interactive. You are encouraged to participate by posing questions to the presenter. These can be typed into the message box, which is located in the bottom left-hand side of your screen. At the end of the session, there will be a short online survey as your feedback is greatly appreciated. I'd now like to pass to Stephen to begin today's webinar.
Hey, thanks, Michelle. Hello, everybody. It's good to have you with us here tonight, and I'd just like to congratulate you for taking the time to educate yourself about property investment. Obviously, a very hot topic at the moment if you're living in Sydney. We've got people from all over Australia listening to us this evening, so again, welcome to everybody Australia-wide. Now, my goal here tonight is of how the property market works, what some of the pitfalls are out there, how to avoid them. And I'd really like you to just consider what I'm saying here tonight as guidelines, not absolute rules, because there's always exceptions to the rules. Now, for many of you hearing the terms of negative gearing for perhaps the first time or looking at property investment for the first time, I thought I'd just start by saying is that there was some time ago, in fact some 30-odd years ago, I came across this concept called negative gearing. And people are somewhat surprised to hear when I say 30 years ago, and yes, negative gearing has been around at least that long, if not longer. And I'm quite interested to see how this topic keeps coming back up again in the news cycles, and has been doing for the last 30-odd years. It seems to be that as politicians and journalists seem to learn about it themselves, they have a lot of commentary on it. So I'm just sort of here to say it's not new, it's been around for a very long time, and we're going to touch a little bit on that later tonight. But for me, discovering this concept of negative gearing some 30-odd years ago, it initially was a little bit of an interest, and I suppose like you, an interest. Then it became a bit more of a hobby. I started to read a lot about it. It took me years to buy my first property, which is one of my first mistakes. I waited far too long, some 5 years of reading about it before I actually acted. So my interest, as I say, my hobby developed into a passion, and that passion turned into a career, and that career turned into a business, which is McCarthy Group as it is today. Now, in my very early days, I was lucky enough to be mentored by quite a successful property investor, and much of what I talk about today is the result of some of the lessons that he's passed down to me. And one of those pearls of wisdom he gave me, he said, Stephen, you've got to create yourself a team. You can't do everything yourself. You've got to have a good agent. You've got to have a good accountant. You need a friendly bank manager. You need a good property manager, good maintenance people. And he was a builder himself, and he built quality properties in the lower North Shore of Sydney, suburbs like Cremorne, Kirkby, Neutral Bay, etc. So that's pretty well much describes McCarthy Group today. It's over all these years I've managed to put a team together. We have offices around the country. We have approximately 35 odd staff, and all these people are all involved in all those components, which Frank told me is that I need to get together to build my portfolio, and which I have. Now, just before I go on, I want to talk to you a little bit about general information versus financial advice. Now, there's a bit of a quirk out there in the Australian financial landscape at the moment, and that is that despite me being in this industry for some 25 odd years, I can't give you financial advice on investment property. I can't, and neither can anybody else in this country, and that's simply because there's no licensed category for it. So what we have done is that what we can give you advice on is things like investment property loans through our brokering arm, ownership structures and tax advice through our accountants. Property managers can advise you on property management and tenancy issues. Our builders can give you an understanding of the building processes, and of course, as real estate agents can give you an overview of a specific locality or the features or highlights of that locality. And so that's 5 different professions that should be involved in a property investment purchase. And again, this is McCarthy Group. Now, speaking of opinions, there is a lot of opinions out there. Now, and there are many commentators out there have an opinion of what is the best way to invest in property. And for a layperson trying to navigate their way through, it can be a little bit of a minefield. Look, some of those opinions are, is commercials better than residential, renovating fix and flicks is the best way to go, buying vacant land or options to purchase land, buying off the plan, working class areas or high class areas, furnished or unfurnished, guaranteed rents versus market rents, and the list goes on. There's a lot to choose out there. And it can be a little bit daunting just trying to work out, separate the fact from the fiction and which options are better than the others. Now, I don't believe there's any one tactic that is perfect. I don't believe there's any such thing as a perfect property. They all have their pluses and their minuses. And like many things in life, it's a compromise. And so tonight we're going to hear a little bit about the McCarthy way. Now, I'm not saying our way is perfect. It just happens to work the best for us and our clients over the last 15 years. Our way has evolved. We've learned a lot of lessons on the way through, and we continue to improve and refine what it is that we do and how we do it. Now, ultimately, you can be the judge of whether or not our philosophy fits in with your sort of thinking. So our philosophies can be outlined pretty well much as I have them here, is that we are an advocate of new over old, and I'll go into some details on that a little later. Growth over income, that means is that for many of our investors are trying to achieve a retirement goal, and that is to have enough assets when they stop work, as opposed to generating income now. It seems to be you really have to make a choice as which one of those do you want. You want income today or growth for tomorrow? Next one is our philosophy is buy and hold, not buy and sell. And so, and then we repeat that process. So it's a building of a portfolio over time. And we believe that providing you get all the foundations right, that this process is repeatable, and it's how you actually build your portfolio. So the first part of that is to planning first and invest second. Now, I know that may sound a little bit obvious, but it's so easy to overlook. It's a little bit like if you've ever gone to do your grocery shopping, you forgot the list, and you end up coming home with a whole bunch of stuff you don't need, and you've got to actually bring stuff back that you actually wanted. Now, this is the sort of the problem when you invest in a property if you're not actually pretty clear on what it is that you're hoping to achieve. Now, Abraham Lincoln once said if he was given 6 hours to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And this is really what part of the planning process should be. Setting out your objectives first, that gives you your direction. It's a little bit like a flight plan. It's not so much about the property, it's about what you want the property to do for you. Now, one of the biggest dangers, of course, with property investing is that many people actually don't get started. I think many of us, myself included, have all had great ideas, but we didn't follow through on them. And some of us have been regretting that ever since. So a plan, one of the things a plan should have in it is a start date and an exit date. A plan establishes a budget. I think we all know that money has a habit of disappearing, and so no matter how much we earn, if we don't think about where it's going, we don't think about it because there's so many other places for that money to go. And credit cards help us get rid of that money a little bit faster. So a plan, from its outset, establishes a borrowing capacity, our time frame, the type of property, the timing, the ownership structure, the tax position, and all these things need to be worked out in advance before you sign any contract of purchase, which invariably can be too late or mistakes can get made at that point. And again, I'm going to go through some of those points as we go through tonight's presentation. So it also helps you define who you are as an investor, and I want to touch on that. And that is that, what is your temperament? Now, if your temperament is to, you want to get really involved in the property market, if you want to buy a property, if you've been watching the block and feel that that's a great career path for you, or it's a way of escaping your 9-to-5 job, it can be a great way of doing it. For other people, however, they don't want to spend, they don't have the time, they don't have the expertise, and they don't want to do it. Here I'm sort of talking about what is your time frame? How much time do you have to put your property portfolio into play? And what obstacles do you see? And this is really a big one, is the obstacles. Many people have a misconception about what the risks are involved in property and can let those perceived risks actually stop them from doing anything at all. And again, through this presentation, we're going to be talking about what some of those obstacles can be. Well, one of them, for example, could be many of us have been brought up to believe that all debt is bad. Now, if you've been told that, I promise you, you will have a lot of trouble in taking out another mortgage to buy an investment property is your conditioning is saying you that look, debt is bad, and a lot of people do struggle with that one. It's also been said that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Now that means that those people can lift us or they can bring us down. But doing something like a property investment can actually threaten our friends, and they can discourage you from wanting to go ahead, perhaps because they're a little too afraid to do it themselves. So these are what I call obstacles. These are thinking in advance of what are all the things that would stop me from going ahead. Now, and again, why I'm highlighting this is because it's only 8% of Australians actually own an investment property. The number is absolutely tiny. And it's really crazy to think when there's so much benefit that can be obtained out there by becoming a property investor, why do so few people actually go ahead with it? And I believe it's one of the reasons is that obstacles are thrown in their paths and it gets put off to another day. Now, so let's go straight to one of the first things that one of the first issues I believe that we need to cover off, and that is affordability. Now, if you're going to go down the income over growth path, that is that the property would be negatively geared in its early years. Well, negatively geared in its early years, it sort of means that for the first property cycle, you need to be able to pay for that property until it starts paying for itself. Now, so it needs to be affordable for you. Now, currently, with our stock, with rents and interest rates where they are at their current levels, the top-up between what a property gets in rent and tax benefits and what its expenses are is around $35 per week. Now, if you can afford that, that's great. If not, maybe it could be time to take a look at your budget. Now, but it's not, the affordability is just not necessarily about you. It's also about your tenant. Now, and that is I want to try and consider that yourself that you're in the business of providing property to a customer, and of course the affordability is a key issue there for tenancies. And the biggest pool of tenants is the middle income bracket, and I believe that is the market that we at McCarthy Group that we target. Higher income earners can always come down to that level, but it also can become very difficult to get higher rents for higher priced properties. Now, Australia, you may have heard, is we have a housing crisis. Well, the housing crisis specifically is affordable housing. So if you think of yourself as a business person, you're providing a need when there's a market has a need for it, and that is, again, is affordable housing. And so one of the key messages here is not to overstretch your tenant, not to overstretch yourself. It's sort of a little crazy here. When most people come to buying property, they tend to overstretch themselves and borrow the maximum amount they possibly can and not leaving themselves much room for a buffer. Now that, of course, can then end up having to sell the property prematurely, and that's where a lot of people lose their money, is not being able to see out the full term or the full cycle of their investment. Now, we can further segment property into these following areas here, or our following a demographic, like who is your customer? Now, there are many market segments out there, and broken them down into, we've got yuppies, young urban professional people, we've got double income, no kids, we've got single person urban dwellings, and of course families. Now, as I alluded to a little earlier, our group is a family group, and why we say that is that it's simply, again, the largest cohort out there. And it's also important that the property that you purchase suits that particular rental market. Now, I'll give you an example. I live in St Ives, in one of the northern suburbs of Sydney, and I watched a townhouse development go up many, many years ago. Now, St Ives is a family-based area. Most people live in houses, and at this time, that's basically all there was. But a developer came along and put up a small row of townhouses, and a friend of mine was actually the selling agent at that time. And those properties sat on the market for absolute years before they found buyers, because at that point in time, it was the wrong type of product for that specific market. So other examples could be small apartments out in the far suburbs when, again, people are looking for homes, providing three-bedroom homes when the market's asking for 4, 3-bedroom apartments which only have 1 bathroom, say again, it's that type of thing, is making sure that the product is right for the marketplace. Incidentally, the Australian population is currently sitting at 25 million people. In 60 years' time, it's expected at 45 million. So our population is growing at a rate of 1 person every 1 minute and 18 seconds. Now, that's that's not bad. It's a pretty healthy growth rate. And the average home has 2.7 people living in that home. So when you hear about a housing shortage, how they work that out is that they are measuring obviously the population growth, and they're measuring the number of homes or new dwellings that are approved by the local councils. And then what they're currently doing is coming up with a minus number. We are underbuilding for the demand. So, okay. Now, one of the next very important things, and I feel where a lot of people make a big mistake when it comes to property, is they use their head, not their heart. Property investment is all about the numbers. If it doesn't work on paper, it doesn't work. And so, because most of us live in a home of some description, we sort of feel like our personal taste has got to play a role in here. Well, it really doesn't. Years ago I met by illustration, I met a woman that lived in Rose Bay. She had a beautiful waterfront apartment, and she was talking to me about property investing, and I showed her a one-bedroom apartment we had in Chatswood. And she said she absolutely poo-pooed it. She said, "There's no way." She said, "I'd never buy that apartment." And I was sort of mystified because it was a good rental return. It was located right in the heart of Chatswood CBD. It's probably quadrupled in value since then. I said, "Well, what don't you like about it?" And she said, "Well, I would never invest in a property I wouldn't live in myself." Now, you can see how that can be pretty limiting. And it's not so much about ourselves. Again, it's about trying to meet the demand for the marketplace. So, so how do you know when you're using your head over your heart? Well, there's a simple tip here. When you say in the same sentence, "We are going to buy an investment property and," right? And the "and" ends up being, "and we can put the kids in there, and we can use it for when we go away to the Gold Coast on the holidays, and we can move into it at a later stage." This is typically where we get our objectives blurred and somewhat mixed up. Now, a good property investment can only serve one master. It's either going to be great for your holiday home or it's going to be great for investment, but very, very rarely the two tend to mix. So that's that's a very key point here, is that try to keep your emotions totally separate from, let's come back to the planning. Is that what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve our kids have got a place to go and live in when they go to university, or are we trying to build up a nest egg for ourselves? And that's quite an important distinction. And I think it also bears out that, as I mentioned earlier, that the number of Australians that own investment property is 8%. The number that own 2 is approximately half of that. The number own 3 is about half of that again. So there's a dramatic fall off between the second, third, and fourth investment property, and I really see that part of the reason why is that the planning's not done properly in the first place. The wrong type of property is invested in. It's trying to serve two masters, and the whole thing becomes too expensive. And that's what the affordability prevents people from building their portfolio. Now, one of the next parts I want to talk to you about is the who owns this. Now, again, one of the mistakes that we see out there is that people tend to sign the paperwork first, sign the sales agreement, and then try and figure out later who should really own it. Now, typically what a lawyer will say is, so I suppose you guys want to put this in both your names, and most people would say yes to that. Now, there's a real disadvantage to doing that, and that comes to tax, and this is really a taxation issue, is that if you take a couple, and one of them's a high-income earner, and one of them's perhaps just a part-time worker. If you buy an investment property and put the property as what is known as, and I've got a classification here, as joint tenants, then they own it 50-50. Now, all the tax benefits that flow from that property will then get split between each partner 50-50. But if one partner is a low taxpayer and the other one's a high taxpayer, the low-income earner can't use the tax benefits, which means to the couple, the property could be costing them thousands of dollars a year more than it really needs to. So that's one of the first things that you need to get your head around, is that which ownership structure do we put that property in? Tenants in common allows you to split the ownership. So you could split it 60-40 or 70-30 or 90-10. And again, a good accountant can help you work out what is the best percentage ownership you should be buying that property in. And of course there are other vehicles as well, family trusts, buying in a company, self-managed superannuation funds. They're all becoming very popular these days. Again, all of them have their pluses and their minuses. And I'm just trying to again flag up some of these issues with you here this evening as these are some of the things that you should be taking into consideration. Okay, one of the next areas here is, let's have a look here, what have we got? Is leverage. Leverage, that's one of my favourite subjects. Now, many of us have been warned off about debt, as I mentioned earlier. Like, debt is bad, like you shouldn't get into debt. And that's sort of a hangover from from either our parents or our grandparents who were brought up in an age, normally after World War II, after the World Depression, and somewhat financial markets all thrown around, but literally banks couldn't be trusted. Taking their pile of money and putting in a tin in their backyard was not unheard of. But it's a totally different landscape here today. And most of us, if we're homeowners already, have achieved most of our wealth through our own home ownership, through buying our own home, saving up our 10% deposit or 5% deposit, and then borrowing the rest of the money. That is in fact leverage. And I'm going to put to you that well, I ask many people this in my seminars, that why didn't you pay cash for your home? Why did you actually use the bank's money? And many people look at me like, are you just for real? Like, of course we had to borrow the money. We didn't have enough cash. And so another way of saying that, like, it would have been impossible to save the money required to buy the house for cash. And clearly is that as you save, the house value continues to increase. So it's like literally like a donkey with the carrot in front of his nose. We're trying to chase after it, but it's continually moving. Now, creating financial independence through property investment is exactly the same thing. It is impossible to create wealth without the use of leverage. You know, the leverage comes from putting in just a small amount of your own money, and then you're controlling a far larger asset. I've got an example of that on this slide here. Is that what would you prefer? Now, I heard a financial commentator talking not that long ago. Is that why invest in property? He said, I can put my money in the bank. I can get a 5% return with no risk, no tenants problems, no nothing. But the problem is in putting money in the bank. It's this example here in front of us. If you put $50,000 in cash in the bank and got 5% return, you'd make $2,500. But if you had a $500,000 property and the property went up by 5%, you make $25,000. And you do that the second year, the third year, the fourth. There's this compounding effect. Money in the bank actually decreases in value. So the concept of leverage, basically means is that, another way of putting that to you is that if I said to you that you could that our interest rates were 1%, would you invest in property if the interest rate was 1%? Now, that might make you sit up and think, and no, I'm not offering 1% tonight, but it's the concept. What I'm talking about is that your holding cost for a property, if you had a $400,000 investment property or $500,000 investment property, providing that all those other things that we spoke about is correctly structured, then the holding cost on the property could be 1% of its value. So whilst the interest rate may be 5%, you're effectively only paying 1% yourself. The taxman and the tenant are paying the balance of it. So effectively, your money is at 1%. Unlike your own home, when you're paying 100% of the interest and all of the outgoings, your costs are equally shared between the tenants. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about property as an investment is as simply as this, because of the leverage it allows you to have. So some of my staff here, they have made more money out of their property and their growth out of their property investment than I actually pay them in wages. Think about that for a moment. So they are, they're getting it from both sides. They're earning a wage, and of course their investments are growing for them as well. So, yeah, something to think about. Leverage is a great thing, and which is why getting the structures right, the taxation, getting the right finance, allows you to leverage, allows you to structure your affairs so you get the maximum leverage possible. Now, when I'm talking about leverage, it's one of the things that comes to, obviously we've got to borrow money, and my little slide here talks about that being a two-timer. Now, what I'm referring to here is that minimising the risk when it comes to leverage, and that is that giving the bank too much control over your assets. Now, and how you simply do that is that you simply use two lenders. Now, that doesn't eliminate potential lending risk, but what it does do is that when most people, if say for example you lose your job and you've only got a limited amount of money coming in, you've got a couple of mortgages to service, is that if you had two separate banks, you can decide as to which property you're going to sell first instead of the bank having full control. So the trap here is called, the technical term for it is called cross-collateralization. Now we've actually got we posted up a guide or two on cross-collateralization up on our website. You feel free to, after the talk here tonight, to go through and learn a little bit more about that. Okay. You know, and look, I've got a little confession to make, is that once upon a time, and I'd say some 30-odd years ago when I first looked at the concept of property, I actually owned a restaurant, and I'm a chef by profession. And I went to my bank because I wanted to borrow some money from him. Now, when I sat, the very first time I sat in front of the bank manager, and I wanted to borrow the stove, and he said to me, well, what security do you have? Now, that was the first time I heard the word. I said, security? Well, we've got the police station 75 metres up the street, and I got great locks on the door. Is that, you know, that's my security? And anyway, what he obviously meant, of course, was what property could I put up for the loan? So owning invested property gives you a lot of scope for, you know, when it comes to lending money. And I'm also going to say to you here is that probably one of the best assets that you have, if you can really get your head around how leverage can help you, how leverage can help build your wealth, then the only thing that prevents you from borrowing money is your credit rating. And I believe that your credit rating is very underrated by most people, that they don't really fully appreciate how much a credit rating that has some delinquencies on it, and that can be as simple as a credit card underpayment or dispute. But I'm just here to say is that it's so important that you maintain a really, really good credit history, and that will pay off in spades, you know, down the track. Okay, now I've got a couple of questions that have come through about property cycles I mentioned earlier, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time about talking about that, or what's the time. Now, property cycles, the property market moves in some fairly predictable cycles, 12 o'clock obviously being the peak, 6 o'clock being at the bottom, and a typical cycle can take from, it was normally 7 years from peak to bottom. Over the last, say, decade or so, it's sort of been pushed out. The cycle's been moving a little bit slower, moving around the 10-year mark. But the clock can give you a reasonable indicator as to where the markets are. And if you have an understanding of where the market is, understand this, there is no one property market in Australia. It's made up of, obviously, different states, different areas within the state, different suburbs within that state. And so the property clock, and again, on our website, we've got a whole download and a video on specifically going into what the property clock is all about. It gives you an indication. It's never definite. But what it will do again is that Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors, says that find out what everybody else is doing and then go the opposite way. He also puts that another way. He says, be fearful when everyone else is greedy and be greedy when everybody else is fearful. So, for example, Sydney could possibly be described right now as being in a mania phase. And if you look at the economic clock, the property clock, you'll see Sydney is, all the indicators are saying that the Sydney property market is certainly somewhere between 11:45 and 12 o'clock. No one can actually tell us for sure, but all the indicators are out there. Now, on the bottom of the clock, there's still plenty of markets. It's still down at 6:30, just starting to come off the bottom. So I really would recommend if you want to learn more about that, again on our website. I think we're under the section called Hot Spots. We've got a lot of information there about reading that property clock. Okay, all right. Now we've got to move on to what we've got here. One-horse towns. Now, there's been a lot of tears from people who've invested in mining towns. Now, those who got in early did really, really well. But the trouble is with mining towns or one-horse towns is that there's plenty of room for the town to grow because there's plenty of land. So there's no constraint on supply. Also, by the very nature of the locality of these towns, building materials are very expensive. And the small community that's normally there is very, very dependent on one or two major employer groups. And so we've seen a couple of headlines here: BHP shutting the Ravensthorpe mine, totally decimated the town. Mooroomba up in Queensland, values falling there up to 40%. So which suggests that you be very, very careful of the areas that you look at as to what sort of industry is underpinning that. But like I said earlier, at the beginning, as I started this presentation, talking about there's exceptions to every rule. Now, one of the first places that we, as McCarthy Group, went to was Noosa, up there on the Sunshine Coast. Now, Noosa could be considered, its main industry is tourism, and that was a little bit of a concern. But overbalancing that was a shortage of accommodation for the hospitality staff. So the waiters, the waitresses, the cooks, and you name it, people involved in the hotel industry, there was an acute shortage of properties. So what we found is that by supplying properties to that market, they rented extremely well and values went up quite quickly. So as I say, there can be exceptions to the rule, and it again comes back to a matter of trying to get the best timing. Okay, the next one I want to just go over here with you is limited. Now, that is trying to find properties or locations that are somehow limited with supply, and this is normally a great attribute. Now, for example, Sydney is currently constrained because it's got a lot of national parks surrounding it, the Pacific Ocean to the east, and so it's naturally constrained on where it can grow. It can't sort of grow out anywhere other than back in there again. And that's one of the reasons there's so much pressure on price here. But as I was saying earlier, is that Sydney is at just the wrong part of the cycle. It's sort of hard to believe that the Sydney market has almost been dead for 10 years, and now we're seeing this massive spurt. And again, that's quite typical of how the markets do operate. Years of no growth, and then there's these growth spurts that take place. So, other examples of this, trying to buy on the high side of the street is better than the low side. North-facing backyards are better than south-facing backyards. Traditional shaped blocks are better than battle-axe blocks, etc. So there's a number of pieces like that when we talk about limited. One of our philosophies is buying new over old, and there's a couple of reasons for that. In fact, more than a couple. They are starting with we get to start with a clean slate. In other words, I would suggest to you that even if you bought at the right time, in the right location, and you got the great tenants, but the property was poorly constructed, then you're in for a whole while of problems. Knowing the integrity of the developer or the builder is so important. It's not unusual to see new properties developing pretty severe problems even after 3, 4, 5 years of ownership. There's very little come back on those developers at that point. So getting new property, making sure that the integrity of the developer is there, certainly gives you far more protection than say start buying an older property you've got no idea of its pedigree. So also, a new property is it's easier to maintain. It comes with warranties and guarantees, built to modern construction methods. It's certainly more attractive from a tenancy point of view, carries far more tax benefits, and those tax benefits can't be underestimated, because the tax benefits can make the property, there's a difference between a property being unaffordable and affordable because of the extra tax credits that you have coming in. Now, having said that, though, is that you shouldn't base your property investment decision only around the tax benefits. It's a bonus. It's not the end-all to be-all. What I'm talking about, that, and a couple of questions coming through about positive gearing, and I tried to mention that a little earlier about different models. Now, and it's our experience in the marketplace that positive gearing is, you need to sacrifice growth in order to get your positive gearing. I was just doing some numbers the other day, and maybe I hope you can carry these in your head. But our calculations is that if interest rates are currently sitting at around 5%, and property expenses normally around 2 to 2.5% of the value of the property, that's approximately a 7.5% return. Now, so you've got to find a tenant that is prepared to pay. I mean, if you just take a look at your own home, wherever you happen to be in, multiply the value of your home by 7.5%, and ask yourself the question: would a tenant pay this for the property? And more often than not, and depending on your location, that rent would be far in excess of the market value. So, whilst we'd all love positive property, it tends to be in the other regional cities where they've had very little capital growth, but they've had rental growth. Okay. Now, surf's up. Now, this is again, this is trying to find what we call a magnet. What will referring to natural attraction. So, obviously, property that's close to a beach and an employment centre is a big bonus, and certainly we found that when we're dealing in Noosa. So parks, lakes, shopping centres, public transport, employment opportunities, a magnet of some description. And probably one of the best magnets, I believe, is schools, having good schools around. Yeah, because, you know, obviously families, and they want kids easy access. So as I was saying earlier, no, there's no one perfect property or no one perfect formula, but it's about trying to get as many of these elements into the property selection process. Again, one of the things that we try and do here at McCarthy Group is make our properties, because we're actively pursuing the family market, is trying to make those properties family friendly. So we're building for the cohort. So that means 4 bedrooms, at least 2 bathrooms, a double garage, large kitchen, plenty of kitchen space, lots of cupboard space, outdoor living areas for the kids, backyard, you know, playing, small details such as plenty of PowerPoints. You know, quite typically, there's normally only one PowerPoint in a bedroom. Obviously, that's never enough. Air conditioning, good colour schemes, storage, easy to keep clean, lots of tiles throughout as opposed to carpet, all these sort of things. These are the type of things that we find have worked for us fairly well. Okay, now, organisation. Now, here I just want to touch on is that when you own an investment property, you're effectively running a business, and you've really tried to try and get all your ducks in a row there as far as your organisation is concerned, because you're now in business and the tax office is giving you plenty of deductions, but you've got to be able to substantiate stuff. So, so what I'm saying here is that you've got to have good systems and a good support network. So the support network is your rental agent, detailing all your expenditure, your accountant making sure that he's getting all the depreciation claims and all the there's a huge list of stuff that you can claim. And again, we also have that up on our website. I think we've got a tax guide up there, which we did at the end of the financial year just gone. That will show you the list of things that you can claim for. So it's important to have the right support people behind you, so you don't have to do it all yourself. Now we've got a couple of questions coming through, and I'm just going to try to answer a few of them as they come through. And one of those questions there was from Erwin about back claiming of building and depreciation allowances. And that is presuming here that this gentleman, he's an existing property investor and has, for one reason or another, hasn't fully claimed all his depreciation allowances and wants to know if you can go back to the tax office and say, hey, look, I didn't claim these things all these years ago, can I claim it now? Well, the good news is the answer is yes, you can put in a amended return, and providing, again, they won't even ask for the substantiation, but you just need to give them the reason why, and obviously have this association there if ever called in to do an audit. So the answer is yes. And also there's another aspect of the tax, and again we talk about in one of our tax guides, is what is called an ITWV, that's the income tax variation form, and that allows you to let's just say your investment property was that you were allowed say a $7,000 a year claim. You don't need to wait to the end of the year to get that claim. Using the income tax variation system, you can make that claim each and get that $7,000. That's approximately $100, $140 per week. You can get that $140 a week in your pay packet if you get paid each week or fortnightly, whatever the case may be. So you don't need to wait for the end of the year, and that's a very important part. So because that can really, really help with your cash flow. People say to me that, oh, I prefer to wait till the end of the year before I get my tax return. I said, well, that could be costing up to $140 a week. And they said, yeah, but I don't mind. I said, yeah, but the thing is that if you can leverage that $140, providing you've got the equity, that $140 could support a second investment property. So instead of having one property at $400, you've got $800,000 worth of property. And that's appreciating. That would be my argument for why you'd want to use an ITW variation. I'm also been asked some question here, are we in a bubble? Now, again, I'd recommend that you have a look at our property clock and see for yourself where you believe the market is. Now, when I say the market, I'm sitting here in Sydney. I think it's absolutely crazy. We spoke about this earlier in the year, saying we really think the market's getting out of control here. But there are many markets around the country that are still coming off their base. So, and there's a lot of talk being written about the bubble. You would be forgiven for believing that there is only one property market, the way the media commentators talk about it. But it's really just a Sydney, and to an extent the Melbourne market, which are starting to show a lot of signs of potential overheating. Okay, we've got another question here. It's sort of on topic. It's about, the question is from Dominique, I believe, is I've got a property and self-managed super fund. Can I use the equity in that to buy another home? Now, I've got to be really careful when it comes to self-managed superannuation fund. I talked to you earlier about who can and can't get advice in relation to property investing, and self-managed super funds is a potential nightmare because there's almost nobody that's qualified out there to actually or meets the government's requirement when it comes to there's so much grey area about who can and can't give you advice. So I'd probably refer that to an accountant. If it's a lending question, property and self-managed super fund, can I use the equity in that home to buy another home? My understanding is no, you can't do that. You certainly can if it's outside of super fund, but by all means use that equity. But as I understand myself, the superannuation laws that does not allow you to do that. Okay, so let's moving on there. So organisation. Okay, now this is all about looking before you leap. Now, this really is about, I think it comes back to our earlier slide here tonight about planning for contingencies. Now, like any business, things don't always go exactly to plan, but most things can be anticipated and graded. And I would suggest to many of us that we all have a spare tyre sitting in the boot of our car, sitting out in the garage here tonight. Yet many of us either have never used it, and those of us who even if they have it and don't know how to use it, we've got a strategy in place. If we've got a flat foot, you just have to call up the local motor people and they come and fix it for us. Now, So why have we got that? Why have we got that spare tyre? I suppose, well, the answer is we're just anticipating a future need. And with property investment, you can pretty well much anticipate most things that potentially could go wrong. And the risk is relative to the knowledge. So again, that's why I want to congratulate you guys for tuning in here tonight and sort of listening to me here talk about some of the aspects of property investment. Most people will let the fear prevent them from actually taking the jump. And one of the things about that planning that you do right in the very outset is putting down and writing, what are your fears? What are you concerned about? Is it concerned about losing a job or not getting a tenant or having a bad tenant, the local bikie gang moves in and wrecks the place? I mean, there's, all of those things can happen, but it's a matter of having you can have a whole lot of contingencies around to, if those things could potentially happen. But look, at the end of the day is that there is a risk with investing in property. And, I was to share a personal story with you, and it's about my family, and each year, at each Christmas, we get together with my mum and my dad and my kids, and we play Monopoly. It seems to be a bit of a family favourite, the old Monopoly game. Mum never wins the game. Right? Mum's got a very, very predictable in the way she plays. And the way Mum plays her game is what I call, Mum has a defensive strategy. And the defensive strategy is hang on to all her money and never buy anything because she goes around the board, but just try and collect the few $100. Now, if any of you have ever played Monopoly out there, you'll know that that's why Mum loses every game, no matter how much I try and counsel her on how to get. I'd like her to be kids occasionally, but Mum's pretty set in her ways, and she doesn't. Her action is, I don't want to risk anything. And yes, certainly there is risk in investing in property, but the biggest risk of all comes from not doing anything. And most of these risks can be quantified and overcome. So again, I'm just going to throw up a couple of what those risks can be. So vacancies, interest rates going up, you're losing your job. You can, certainly take income protection for that. You can protect yourself against having a bad tenant or the tenant breaks the lease and they take off. Interest rates. We're really seeing with interest rates at the moment is that the market's in a very much in a sweet spot. Interest rates available at almost 50-year lows at 5%, under 5% in some cases. Rental yields are also meeting at around that 5% mark. So, you've got 5% going out on interest payments and 5% coming in rent payments. You're getting very, very close already to a neutrally geared property. And as I say, many of the cases that we're throwing up at the moment is approximately $35 a week. That's how close it is. And if you can lock those interest rates in, as you can take 5-year fixed money. That's as I say, the market's in a sweet spot. It's been years since I've seen it as good as that. Now, one of the other risks I'm going to touch on here, and this actually I don't have this one written down, but I wanted to share with you is that the biggest risk of all is not doing anything at all, and it's this psychological thing called analyst paralysis. Now, I've got a great example of that. And many years ago, we were doing a seminar in one of the country towns, and a professor from the local university, he was the economics professor, and he came along and he wanted to meet with me afterwards. I went to go and visit him. And I was, somewhat a little bit puzzled here. I've got a university professor. He's actually the head of the department, and he, great. He wants to invest. He's obviously pretty switched on. And so I walked in there, and I said to the guy after the small talk, I said, "You must be wealthy." And he looked at me, and he shook his head. He says, "I'm not wealthy, not by a long stretch of imagination." But my salary is, I think back then, I'm talking probably nearly 15 years ago, even longer. My salary is I think it was $70,000 a year. And now it was sort of like my turn to be a little bit puzzled there. I said, well, but as an economist, you have a huge advantage over us mere mortals, because clearly you could see what's going on in the market. He said, you're right. He said, we do. He said, myself, my colleagues, outside of the university, we analyse what's going on in the markets. We see the wave coming. We see it when it hits us, and we see it go again. And I said, well then, well, isn't that great information? And he said, no, our problem is that, no, we sit on our hands. We actually don't do anything. And, that stuck with me for a very long time, is that, a great example of someone highly educated with all the information at their fingertips that actually never makes the move. And I think that is one of the biggest things, the biggest risk to starting your portfolio, is waiting for that time to be right, because invariably it never is. And again, I want to excuse me if I'm repeating myself here, but part of the very first slide we talked about tonight was plan first and invest second. In a planning process is that setting yourself a deadline so it moves away from talking about it to doing it. And you set that deadline for whatever you feel comfortable with. Would it be 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever the case may be. Make a promise to yourself that by this time I will have invested in a property. And I think if you find that you make that commitment to yourself, you'll actually follow it through. So that takes us to the approach that we have here. Investing in property is somewhat, after it's all said and done, it's actually quite unexciting. It's a little bit like watching paint dry. Property investment is it's not a sprint. It's more of a marathon. And once you've done it, and once you're in it, you really don't have to do anything. It then goes on autopilot. And it's just simply about being patient and waiting for the market to do invariably what the market does. I'll just also mention here is that we are doing a survey here tonight. We'd really appreciate, this is in fact the second time in the last 8 weeks that we've done a webinar. This is the very first time I've actually spoken about this specific topic in this format in which I'm doing. And I would appreciate if you could just spend a moment of your time and grade us and let us know if the information is relevant to you, whether or not you're getting anything out of it, whether there are other topics that you would like us to have covered, maybe more specifics. So you can't offend me. Please feel free to express your opinions in any which way you wish. So, speaking of analyst paralysis, I said I think I've made almost every single mistake that's ever been made out there in the property investment world, including waiting some 5 years before I actually moved. So that means between about 1988 to 1992 or so, which, looking back at that was obviously fantastic times, but racked with insecurities and doubts about and waiting for that perfect property came through. I did leave it too late. What I ended up buying an investment property in St Ives, and I remember I paid $200,000 for that, which obviously seems pretty cheap today, but it wasn't that cheap back then. And then 4 years later, I lost patience with it because I felt that it was hardly moving, and I sold it for $300,000. So I thought I was pretty clever. I'd made $100,000 out of that process. But now I look back and I literally drive past, because I still live in that suburb. I drive past that house and it hurts me when I drive by, because I know it's worth approximately $2 million today, and I sold it for such a pittance. So one of the great mistakes is not buying soon enough and selling selling. Today I consider myself to be, I'm a property collector. I'm not a trader. I just try and collect them and hang on to them and let time do the rest. But also I want to say for those for the parents out there that are listening is that what this teaches your children, and if they hear mum and dad discussing property investment and doing property, they begin to see that their world in a different way. They seem to see that conditioning in a different way. can you imagine what it would have been like in your life today if you had been brought up around mum or dad or both that were active property investors, and how perhaps that could have changed your life. And I really think this is a great opportunity, is that this is not just about you, but it actually can be creating a legacy for your family. I'm sort of proud to say, as my 18-year-old daughter, she's year 12, she actually finished school today, as a coincidence. She investing in her first property this year, and really what I'm trying to do with her is to try to teach her that property investment isn't scary. It's normal. Borrowing money for the bank, having that responsibility is just a normal part of life. So no matter what she ever does in her career, that she's got a very strong and solid platform, financial platform that she can expand on no matter what she decides to do. And so, that's what it is for me and my kids, is just teaching them that responsibility and showing them a way on how they can, they can become financially independent themselves. And clearly, obviously, they talk to their kids about it, and this whole cycle can change. And 8% of Australians aren't just owning investment properties. It's a crazy number. People often say to me, well, this seems amazing. This is great. This is wonderful. Why aren't more people doing it? If everybody knew, it wouldn't work if everybody knew. That's what they say. Well, the theory and the reality is that many people won't do it for whatever reason. So again, tonight I hope some of what we'll be talking about will encourage you to firstly, get perhaps some of these concerns or fears and get them down on a piece of paper. Sitting around the kitchen table and sort of articulating what those things are maybe for you. Now, speaking of the kitchen table, that really brings us to our office, or what's next for those of you that are interested. I'm going to try and answer one or two more questions before we wrap up. I know we're almost just out of time here. But what we do find is that many people are concerned that whether or not the time is right for them, and they may be paying off a mortgage, or they're about to get a new mortgage, or they're changing jobs, or they're looking at moving out of their existing family home and making that an investment property, and then moving to a larger one. There's just so many different combinations of what people are thinking of what they should be doing here. Now, I'm here to say that our company is set up with our tax, our financing guys, property people that can really give you some good guidelines. Is that if you've got sort of issues or concerns, or not too sure as to what to do right at the moment with your circumstances, we're available. No, it doesn't matter where in Australia you are. We've got a facility here. We can run through our presentations online and discuss all the stuff here for you. Look, I've had to be pretty brief here tonight, and I think many of the stuff that we have spoken about could fill a chapter in itself. But tonight's objective was just to sort of maybe help stimulate your thinking, maybe open your mind up to a couple of ideas here. So I certainly hope we've achieved that, and again, I'd be very appreciative of your feedback as far as that survey is concerned. And of course, if you would like to meet us, as soon as I wrap up here tonight, there's going to be a link put up on your page, and that will take you to one of our registration forms. Or very simply, if you'd like to just subscribe to my blog, where we've got a whole bunch of articles going up on an ongoing basis. And I'm just going to answer a couple of questions here, and one of those questions came up was about cross-collateralization, and that again is when you've got one bank and it takes a mortgage over your home and it takes a mortgage over your investment property. It is, by the way, the most common way people fund their purchase for the investment property. The trouble in doing that is you've got one bank that's controlling all of your assets. You've got a total exposure to them. If you have two banks, and two banks is that simply you go to, let's say your existing bank, for example, and you're using the equity in your home, you increase a credit, or you get a credit facility that will cover a 20% deposit, a 20% deposit plus cost. You raise it out of the family home. You go to Bank B and say, I've got a 20% deposit, and I'd like to buy an investment property, and they'll give you the balance of the 80%. So that way you keep them separate. and you control which properties are which and which ones you want to sell. And it's the same with your third property. When you go to buy your third property, again, you could use a third bank and a fourth bank if you wish to. And again, you've got far better control over your entire portfolio as opposed to letting one bank do it. So it works in most of the cases. Sometimes there is reasons to have it all cross-collateralized, but certainly is what we've found over the years. It's been quite a successful strategy. Yeah, look, I've got a really good question here. I'm not even sure how to answer it. Can you tell me about how you know about a builder's integrity and work quality? Well, the way we do that is that over the years we have developed our own plans and specifications, and which for example, most a sales contract will have air conditioners to all rooms. Whereas what we would do is that we would specify that they are Kelvinator air conditioning, so we don't end up with some brand from China that you couldn't even pronounce the name of the manufacturer, who invariably, if it breaks down, you can't get the thing replaced. It's about working with reputable tradespeople, and you can find them by getting references and doing thorough checks on them. There's number of searches that you can do online that, particularly in Queensland and Victoria, whereas any complaints that lodge against the builders are all against their record. You can see that there. So those are some of the ways that you can check the integrity. I personally, I have very hands-on with every builder that we deal with. That wasn't always the case, and we've learned some lessons there. Is that to find out their methodologies and their building practices. What I'll tell you in a very, very simple way of doing that, if you drive around a construction, say a new home estate, that the builders that have a clean site, that will tell you something about their workmanship. A builder that has integrity and is a professional will always maintain a very clean site. You will not see the KFC containers lying around the place and junk everywhere. It'll all be in the bin, it'll all be clean, because he's got pride in his work. And that's a very easy way for a consumer to figure out whether or not the builder is up to speed. And that is it, I'm afraid, folks. We have run out of time, but if you have any questions, I will answer them personally. I've got everyone's email address here, at least I think I have. So if I haven't answered your question tonight, I'll be going through this tomorrow and trying to provide you personal answers on those questions that you had. So thanks for joining us. We'd be really, really happy to speak with you, and I really hope that one day I get the opportunity to meet you in person. As I say, it was some 30-odd years ago when I became interested about negative gearing, and well, not so much negative gearing, about property investment, and that interest became a hobby, became a passion, became a career, and now it's a business. I'm a business which I'm very, very proud of. I'm very proud of the work that we do, and it's been a really interesting and fun journey. So thank you for joining us. Good night.